Well, first of all, just let me say I'm Mark Holmes, Health and Safety Manager for ICMM. And in 2018, ICMM launched the Innovation for Cleaner, Safer Vehicles initiative. The initiative brings together 27 of the world's leading mining metals companies, representing approximately 30% of the global market, with over 650 sites between them, and 19 participating original equipment manufacturers and technology providers to collaborate in a non-competitive space to accelerate the development of a new generation of cleaner, safer mining vehicles. It's our intention that the initiative will bring benefit for the entire mining industry and is open to all OEMs who would like to join. Next slide, please. So the ICSV initiative is working on 3 areas: greenhouse gas emissions, diesel particulate emissions, and vehicle interaction. So why did we actually choose vehicle interaction as part of this initiative? Well, failure of vehicle interaction controls cause around 30 to 40% of industry fatalities. And in 2018, mobile equipment and transportation was the highest cause of fatalities for ICMM company members, around 30% of fatalities. And it's an area that all mining companies, no matter the location or commodity, have a challenge with. So the ambition, therefore, of the ICSV initiative related to VI is to promote collision avoidance technology capable of eliminating fatalities from vehicle interactions and are made available to mining companies by 2025. However, this is with the recognition that technology on its own is not a silver bullet solution to this issue. Next slide, please. So in support of the ambition, a maturity framework has been developed aimed at operations managers at operations. The intent of the maturity framework is to map, motivate, and measure the intended status and journey of the VI work stream that we have in the initiative. In addition, it will drive conversation amongst industry stakeholders to converge thinking, decision making, and actions for the most effective use of technology and operational practices to meet the initiative's ambitions. Therefore, the maturity framework is designed to enable companies to move operations at their own industry-informed pace, provide a visual tool to assess progress at a site against a collated company and industry level, provides insights on technology solutions already available or in development, and provides insights on leading practice operational controls, and provides clear industry direction for OEMs and third-party innovation development. In other words, it's not the how-to for implementing vehicle interaction, but a start in the change conversation needed at companies and operations. So I won't go into the additional detail about the maturity framework. It is available on the ICSV Knowledge Hub that you can reach through the ICMM website at www.icmm.com. But essentially just to provide a bit of background and context, especially when it's referred to in today's session. However, this webinar is more about what you can do once you understand your current maturity. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today we'll be hearing from the Earth Moving Equipment Safety Roundtable, Emers, and the team about what you can do once you understand your VI maturity. So how does Emers actually fit into the ICSV initiative? So on the screen here we have the ICSV collaboration model, which is formed of 3 layers: individual initiatives, industry partnerships, and the ICSV initiative itself. And also how they compare to the ICSV's 4 strategic pillars, which are to form a common way of thinking, solve industry level issues, consolidate intent and commitment, and promote industry adoption. So this model is useful as it helps create a safe space for dialogue, promote the understanding that to send key messages across organisations like mining companies and actually make a change, it must be done at different decision-making levels throughout an organisation and use appropriate language throughout those levels from the CEO, site managers through to practitioners. So it also helps us to be clear on our boundaries. So in our case, to convene, motivate and promote. So operating within an anti-competition environment means that we also remain technology agnostic. So Emers we see as being a partner in this work, as they've been doing a lot of work over many years on developing the tools and approaches to help solve this industry level issue. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Tony Egan from Glencore, who's going to moderate a discussion with the Emers team on this subject. Thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you, Mark, for the intro. First up, I'll just do a little bit of structure around today's webinar. In the room with me in Brisbane, we've got a team. Ian Curran from BHP is certainly going to be speaking to some of this. We've got Matt Clements in Perth. Unfortunately, Matt can't fly at the moment, so Matt's also going to be doing some presentation of some of the material. We've got Mark Gearson from Rio Tinto. Mark's certainly in the advisory group for this and heads up the current fire fatality stuff, but certainly has involvement in this space as well. Also in the room, Mike Boyle and Peter Standish, who've been working with not only ourselves, but also the ICMM in setting up the Knowledge Hub. And they're going to be here, and we're going to show you a bit of that later on as well. So there's a methodology there. In terms of today, we've got more than we had this morning, so thank you for everyone for getting online. I think we had 52 this morning. We're up over 55 this afternoon. The way we ran this morning was to get you to ask through the chat line any specific questions. If you just want to offer comment at a given point, that's great. The team in the room here includes Eve McDonald, our Emers coordinator, and they'll be monitoring the chat line and trying to give us a heads up on things and see if we can build those answers of the questions into what's going on. Given there's that many people, we'll just do it from this perspective. Worked well this morning. The other thing is we capture all your thoughts and everything, and if we don't get to answer it, we will be responding more formally after this. And it also gives us an insight into maybe some of the follow-on webinars that we're proposing to do through the course of this year. I think that's about all the intro stuff. So I might move on to what is Emers. So quick, for those that don't know the organisation, started in 2006. Primary function when we set it up was to influence OEMs in terms of their design and how they build their products. You know, if you can get error-tolerant designs that eliminate or limit the consequence of a particular situation, then we're all a hell of a lot better off. And trying to manage things with lots of training and procedures of our people is always pretty fallible. So one of the key things we try and do is offer a common industry voice. And really the issue there is that as designers and manufacturers, and there's a lot on the call today, if you're going to invest some time and effort in R&D and developing product, you actually want to understand that there's a reasonable chance of a market to sell this stuff. Our role is not to certify or do anything like that, but if we can pull together a common industry voice, you guys can make a judgment about whether you want to invest and try and provide some responses in this space. And if you build the best mousetrap, we'll probably buy it. So one of the things that we also try to promote is that it's about, there's only ever a leading situation, not a best one. And, promoting leapfrogging and continued improvement thinking is a good way to be. So we try and promote that. And lastly there, it's about delivering practical outcomes. And today's webinar, we hope, will provide some of those practical outcomes for end users, but also suppliers as well as major OEMs and the third parties. And we've got a few of our research partners on the line that we've been working with today, which is great. That's about it really for Emers in the background. Specifically in the vehicle interaction space, we've got a working group that's got over 150 people signed up to it, and we have monthly calls that update people on key developments in what's happening in the VI space. We've also run workshops over the course of the last few years on different topics, from the proximity detection testing project, the interface protocol, the ISO, what's now the ISO 21815 interface protocol development. We drew on the great knowledge and experience of all the different parties that are up on that page to pull together an industry view on that and move forward on it. So thank you to the people, and there's a lot on the call today that are actually in that group. And there's no barrier to being involved in that stuff. And I'll just say that, you know, membership of Emers, we've been asked this a couple of times, is for user company only. And the reason for that is that we start the problems by wanting to mine something and buying the equipment. And we're at the end of the problem is that we actually operate the stuff when it gets delivered. But all of you on the phone today can play roles in the process at different stages along the way and at continuing stages. So the view of Emers is our job is to clearly give you an understanding of the user methods and problems that we face. And as designers, then you go away and with a good understanding of that and do what you do well, which is design these things out if you can. So that's the background to Emers. I'll just move on now. The process of today, I'm going to start asking questions of the group. And this morning's exercise, we got through the sort of formal session of a lot of the material, and then we drew on a lot of the questions and the conversation flowed. So hopefully that we can achieve the same outcome. Seemed to be well received this morning. Back in 2013, Emers was at a point where we'd been working on a number of topics, access and egress and working in heights, and those things have been started to be dealt with in terms of the design changes from the factory and those sorts of things. And we're asking ourselves, well, we only exist to solve these problems. We're not here to be an organisation first and then go and find problems. We're here to solve the problems of the industry if we can and assist. If there's nothing to solve or we can't help, then we get out of the road and we've got plenty of things to do elsewise. So Ian walked in the door in 2013 and said, I think I've got a major problem, the burning platform. And that was at the time we talked about it as collision stuff. But as it grew to become, the problem was actually vehicle interaction in a more broader sense. And so we began some work on this. And the first major industry workshop we ran was in September of 2013, I believe, out at North Parks. We had people from around the world that attended. There was about 60 people. And it was really clear that this was a problem that everyone was trying to work on. It was quite complex, and we really didn't have a way forward. It took us from 2013 till about 2017, as per this diagram, and I'll explain what it is in a minute, to pull together enough understanding of it to sort of say, here's a strategy about the things that we need to do to move this whole topic forward. And that's what we did. So this diagram you're seeing at the moment is called an array diagram. Up in the right-hand corner, it sets out really the objective of the strategy, which is to provide an innovation resource and methodology for the systematic and practical improvement of vehicle interaction controls in mining. So that was the goal we set ourselves. What this diagram does is looks at all the moving parts of the industry, from researchers to third parties to the OEMs to industry bodies, and also to the gaps that we saw that no one was addressing. You know, the standards address some things. So particularly those circles in the left-hand side over there really were areas that we saw were not being addressed by anybody. And we thought, well, if we don't come together as an industry and try and facilitate that, they're probably not going to get closed. And it started to highlight that, you know, no wonder we weren't moving that far forward in this topic. And people have been playing and trying to provide technology in this space and make change for quite a number of years. So the right-hand bubble there is a key one, and it'll get more talked about later, but it really reflects the interaction with ICMM. It was quite a deliberate strategy on our behalf to engage with ICMM. We'd been working with ICMM since the inception of Emers in different forms, but on this particular topic, we saw a need to actually address this differently. And it was great that the ICSV, which was a new venture for ICMM in the way that they're approaching this whole exercise from its typical mode of operation, allowed us to collaborate and be involved in that. So it was a very deliberate thing. So I'm going to ask Ian now to answer a few questions about that journey in the beginning. And that's really, mate, you might talk to us a bit more about the topic and how we started in 13 and maybe take this strategy stuff a bit further.
Look, thanks, Tony, for that. As Tony said, I'm going to talk about that left-hand piece. You'll see the array diagrams got smaller and thinner. We've moved a lot of those initial concepts that we came up with in August into more consolidated views, and certainly a lot of the stuff that was yellow and white has now gone green. And if I move to the left-hand side, 2013, we had a suite of tools called the design philosophies, and really started with those design philosophies in our early work to work through things like access and egress and all the other bits that we saw. As we moved into the vehicle interaction work, we pulled out the design philosophies and quite readily and quite quickly understood that design philosophy 5, which was machine operation and controls, was not enough depth to allow us to move the vehicle interaction topic forward at a pace or with enough clarity to allow the industry to move forward. We had some workshops in North Parks, as Tony said, and started talking about these areas and where we could go. And from that, we developed a performance requirements document, PR5A, to augment the design philosophy 5 and allow us to understand with more clarity the vehicle interaction problem. We moved through that area fairly well, with steps forward, steps backwards, but ended up coming up with a 9-step model that has evolved from around 2015, when we actually nailed down what the 9-step model may start to look like, to what it looks like today. And if we move into the next slide, I'll talk about the 9-step model and really the key principles that guide us through this work to date. The first piece of that was we came up with the 4 potential unwanted events in the vehicle interaction space, and you can see those on the left-hand side of the slide. I think the one that was the most challenging one was PUE4, the loss of control, and where that fitted in. Equipment to person, equipment to equipment, equipment to environment were all quite obvious areas of vehicle interactions. The loss of control was a piece that took a lot of understanding of, did it fit in the model here or did it fit somewhere else, but certainly worked well in the 9-step model that we built. If you just bring up the 9-step model, Tony, into that. The 9-step model in the early days was broken down into the 3 areas that you can see on the screen. Areas 1 and 2 in the design phase, around site requirements and segregation controls. And that really is, when you build a mine site, the years before any incidents happen, how did we build the mine site? How did we design it? Did we get the berms, the access control, all those things right in the early phases? Because that builds a foundation to allow the evolution as you move down this 9-step model to get better. In the operate phase, in 2015 was areas 3 through 6, and certainly those areas around operating procedures, authority to operate, fitness to operate, and operating compliance were all very much of that of the weeks, the days, and the hours prior to any incident happening. As we moved into levels 7, 8, and 9 around operator awareness, advisories, controls, intervention controls, we had those in the React space. And that model served us well for a good number of years. And certainly, we saw the dynamic interdependencies between those control levels, and we saw the control categories very clearly operated in different timeframes. And as we worked through the timeframe piece and some other models, we looked at where they sat and how that model sat in a vertical scope didn't suit our needs. So if we move to the next slide, we'll see we moved the model to more of a horizontal view and moved the level 7 operator awareness into the operate field. Because we saw operator awareness as a normal operating view that, as an operator drove around a mine site and in the cycles, we were allowed to, the operator needed that awareness to see what was going on around him. And it certainly wasn't that there was any hazards or any reactions or anything that needed to be done. It was just that the operator needed to be given a little bit more contextual awareness of what was going on. And certainly that horizontal view allowed us to then move the react phase into what the react phase really was, the advisor controls and intervention controls. Those were the last chance intervention pieces that allowed us to tell an operator that something was seriously wrong and that they needed to do something before a collision happened. So those pieces all, as we move that model from the vertical to the horizontal and build out the pieces in the right scopes of design, operate, and react, gave us a lot more ability to bring into view some models that have been developed by other people and other industries. And if we move into the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about Mika Ensley and the Mika Ensley model. Mika Ensley was the chief scientist for the US Air Force back in the day. She now works in the US Pentagon as an advisor, but she was and is world-renowned on her human factors modeling of situational awareness. And certainly what she put together and what Emers adopted or adapted from her work is that central model where we have the environment. And as the environment changes, you need to perceive the environment, you need to comprehend it, it needs to be projected, a decision needs to be taken, and an action from that decision needs to be done to stop an impending issue happening. So splitting that 9-layer model and the 7, 8, 9 into those areas gave us a lot more clarity in why we moved 8 and 9 into the react and 7 stayed in the operation field, because perception and comprehension is a normal everyday part of an operator's work and how they go around their views of the mine site. So as things change, they perceive and comprehend and do a bit of that projection of what they're going to do, but it's not overly complex. As you move into the level 8 and level 9 work, that projection becomes far more critical, and the alarm sensors start going off in the operator, and the alarms of vehicle interactive systems may start to take place. So being able to project that something is not in the normal and something is going wrong, and allowing a decision to be taken and then an action to follow that decision is very important. So those works all tied in very nicely into the work that we've done within Emers and the 9-step model, and why going through that hierarchy of the 9-step model from the design of site requirements all the way through to those milliseconds prior to an incident happening stood the model in good stead over time, and has allowed us to recognise that there is no silver bullet or magic box that you can put into a piece of mining equipment that will give you the answer without doing the preparation work to get you through the normal operations to reduce the chances of those imminent threats happening. I think from that, I'll hand back to Tony. There's a few questions that may come out of this, and please put those up on the screen as we go through. But I'll hand back to Tony to move us forward from how the 9-step model has set us up in good faith and good stead to move forward in this area.
Thanks, Ian. Basically, I'm going to ask Matt a question to take this a bit forward. Mark talked earlier about the connection between ICMM and Emers, and sort of how people often ask us, well, where do we start and finish with each other? So I'm going to ask Matt to take us through now a bit about that, and really focus on this part of the array diagram, which is really those connections pieces. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Tony. The vehicle interaction project has evolved over a long period of time, really, and the end result is this array diagram, which shows you what Emers has focused on, the areas that we've completed and the areas that have to be improved, or finished off going forward. But basically, ICMM was identified as a conduit to work in parallel to develop a vehicle interaction solution. They were doing a lot of work in that space. They saw the benefits of the work that Emers had done, and that's how the relationship began. The ICMM is basically managing the overall vehicle interaction project, with Emers providing the technical support. And it's an innovation and resource that supports the systematic and practical improvement of vehicle interaction controls in mining, and that's exactly what we're trying to achieve. So just to give a bit of an overview of the array diagram, there's 5 key categories. First, you've got the Emers history and design philosophies in the top left. Then you've got the intervention controls, the design and operate controls, the industry collaboration, and related industry activities. And you'll see that there's a strong ICMM flavour to that array diagram, because obviously that's why that's the best way to get this information out to the industry. I'll now go into a little bit more detail about some of the critical aspects that make up the VI project landscape. So this first document that you see is the Vehicle Interaction Control Improvement Guideline, and it's the primary reference document for anybody that wants to embark on a vehicle interaction control improvement project, I suppose. So the overall objective of this procedure is to provide consistent, structured guidance for operating sites so that they can deliver projects that improve vehicle interaction controls. The guide was developed by combining approaches that have been applied at ICMM member company operations to systematically improve the vehicle interaction controls. And this includes the operational integration of the new technology MEI controls. And the expected users are divisional leaders within the business and that have the experience to plan and deliver complex business improvement projects. And the point we want to make here is that the methodology that we have chosen is truly a project management based approach, because we saw that as the most effective way to achieve the desired outcome. The Emers Vehicle Interaction Control Procedure is available from Emers via the Vehicle Interaction Knowledge Hub, which we'll go into a little bit more detail on later in the presentation. But basically, it's a website that you can go to that has a logical sequence to resolve your vehicle interaction issues and understand your current baseline.
Thanks, Matt. So you've mentioned about taking a project management approach, and obviously some people have been asking, well, what's the connection, how the maturity framework connects into that? So maybe you can take us through that piece, mate.
Yeah, so the slide that you see in front of you is what we call the work breakdown structure, and this is the way we've settled on managing the project of vehicle interaction improvement. So you can see that there's 6 main objectives. They're the coloured boxes on the right-hand side. The first is project management, and that's basically setting up your project. And then the second part, which is probably the most critical area, is the vehicle interaction control framework baseline. Then we've got the existing vehicle interaction control effectiveness, which is all about determining how effective the controls you have in place are in the current world. And then existing vehicle interaction control enhancement. So that's enhancing the controls that you already have in place to make them effective or more effective. Then you've got the new vehicle interaction control implementation. So this is once we've decided what's required to close the gaps. This is how we're going to go about that. And then the last section is the mine of the future digitalisation. If we go to the next slide, Tony, I'll explain in a little bit more detail. So, as I mentioned before, and Ian mentioned before me, we decided the most effective way to manage vehicle interaction improvement is via, a project. So you'll notice the work breakdown structure is set up exactly like a project, and you'll notice on this slide that there's a lot more detail below those headers that I just explained, and that detail is also found in the Knowledge Hub. So you are able to get a very clear idea from this information as to how to effectively manage a vehicle interaction project. It's a great tool for anybody embarking on the journey. The key point that I mentioned before was understanding your baseline. Where are you starting from? What are your current controls? How are you performing in that area? And the second part is if you can notice the cursor is actually over the top of the control baseline, which is the phase 1 part. And obviously there's a lot more detail behind this breakdown structure than what you see in the slide pack. The third part is identifying existing operational improvements. So plug the gaps, return to nameplate performance, use the technology that you've got in place, the way it was designed, and making sure that the controls are effective. But using this technique, you're also going to identify a pile of gaps. I don't think there's an operation on the globe that has closed all of those gaps yet. And to be honest, I don't think the technology's out there to be able to close some of those gaps either. So the idea is that this is an ongoing improvement process. Although we manage it as a project, there's always going to be an opportunity to review your current performance and go through this process multiple times over the years. Identify and implement. It's iterative design and technology innovations. Then you've got 5, identify and implement, which is step change design and technology innovation. So this is how we can use technology to either assist us to manage our controls, to ensure our controls are effective, or to actually interact and prevent a collision occurring, like our collision avoidance type technology. The maturity framework is the way to start. So Mark mentioned in the beginning that the beginning and the link with Emers comes through the maturity framework, and you'll see under the number 1, the project management side of things, there's a box called maturity framework assessment. And the idea is that the maturity framework is a way to start the process, and it's the beginning of the project scope prior to moving into each of the other phases. It's the key aspect that helps determine an operation's current state and it's a critical component to the change management. So it really gets you to understand how big this potentially is and how many gaps you have and what level of risk that you have within the business. And the key to that is using that to motivate management to make change. In a lot of instances, we find that management aren't interested. They know there's a problem, but they don't necessarily go to the level of detail that we have to rectify it. They're quite happy to look for the silver bullet and buy some technology, only to find that their levels 1 to 7 are dysfunctional. So as I said before, all this information and more is available on the Knowledge Hub and will be demonstrated later on in the presentation.
So Matt, you're talking about the base.
Interrupt, someone's got their mic.
You there, mate? Well, you're talking about the base. You're not, man. Oh.
Yeah, I've got you.
You got us? Oh, sorry, pick up there. So you're talking about the baseline, mate, and maybe you can introduce us to this piece a little bit more. Is he back? Where is he? There, Matt?
Yeah, you're there again, Tony. Sorry, something's going on with our technology. This is why you don't rely on silver bullets. So I mentioned it in the previous slides, but baseline effectiveness formed part of the work breakdown structure. It's the column 2 basically, and the idea behind baseline is it's the first step in project management. It's about understanding the gap and giving you something to work from to actually move into the good part of the project, which is implementing the technology and closing all the gaps associated with this vehicle interaction on site. But when you look at this slide, it's a simple flow chart. It establishes the baseline effectiveness for existing controls for normal operations, and it considers the control interdependencies, so the links between the level 1 to 9 in our collision avoidance strategy type stuff. It's used to confirm and optimize the existing controls. So you can see that the first box is establishing the baseline effectiveness. And the point I want to make here is that we've developed templates to be able to do that. And that's our baseline assessments. Confirm and optimize existing controls. So as I said before, that's about making sure that we improve current practice, and we look at opportunities, which is the next one. We look at opportunities to implement technology and any other aspects that could potentially improve our performance. But the whole time, I think it's important to understand that you need to control the interdependencies. There's a lot of links between the levels 1 to 9, and they overlap quite regularly, and it's not as simple as the model looks. So if there's ineffective change that takes place, you could introduce new risks. So that's why this baseline assessment and following the steps in the work breakdown are critical, and the order is critical to ensure that you capture all of the things you need to prevent vehicle interaction, unwanted vehicle interaction on site. And this is another point where I mentioned the silver bullets quite often, and my company, Anglo American, is a good example, or a poor example, of where we've spent a fortune on collision avoidance technology only to better understand the pitfalls associated with it, and the fact that it's not a solution. The way companies should be looking at this stuff, and the way that the work breakdown structure is set up, is to ensure that we don't activate the technology. You know, you want to be working in the levels 1 to 7. You want your people to never ever put themselves in the line of fire, for example, because the way we need to look at this is if the technology gets activated and our machine takes active control or alarms and gives the operator an indication that something's potentially potentially going to go wrong, then we've failed. We've failed the levels 1 to 7. So technology is great, but it's definitely no silver bullet in this instance. And the focus needs to be on the levels 1 to 7 and getting them so refined that you never ever activate the technology. The technology is there for those, you know, that odd occasion that it happens, and obviously you can't rely on technology, as we just found out. It can fail. So what I'll do now is I'll throw over to Tony to explain the methodology for developing a baseline so people better understand how to go about it.
Thanks, Matt. So just going to quickly touch on this this slide. What we call the control framework is a really simple approach to unpacking how your control actually work on site. So really simple. The first step there that we call a ROS, a required operating state, it's what is it you're trying to achieve? Maintain vehicle clearance, drive at speeds appropriate to conditions, park correctly, give way. And they're simple statements, but when you actually start unpacking all the ways that we actually don't achieve that, so the credible failure modes, it's quite substantial. I know in one of the baselines we've done in the surface operation, there's 19 ways to get clearance wrong. And then you start looking at what links to that. Well, the business inputs are those things that live in our management systems that we do every day to stop those failures occurring. And it's rather interesting that when we do an investigation into an incident, the first thing we look for in the methodology is a contributing factor. Well, actually, contributing factor is equivalent to a failure mode or an erosion factor, depending on where you come from. But it's interesting when you look at the risk assessment work we do, which is the upfront stuff that helps us define some of our controls, that actually isn't there. And this is probably the key bit that we've seen that's changed the way we've looked at this in a very proactive sense. So I'm not going to go too much more into it because we're intending to run a series of webinars over the coming months that we actually go into these things in more detail. And there's a whole webinar just on running the baseline using this approach. As an example of the outputs, there's 13 required operating states that we've identified. I mentioned a couple of them quite quickly. Within that, there's groupings of credible failure modes. There's about 81 that we've identified, and they've been cross-checked against a lot of incident data. If you just want to follow incident data, you'll get the prevalent frequent activities. But the other thing about the control framework is looking at every way you can get it wrong, not just the ones that you're currently getting it wrong. And it's an important point because if you're just basing yourself on your incident data, you might leave yourself some blind spots. So this process looks at all the ways you can get it wrong and then starts to clarify, maybe you've got some really, really good systems in place and that's why you're not seeing those incidents, or maybe it's just damn good luck. But until you actually go through this process, I don't think you can answer that question. And down the bottom with the business inputs, you know, it's showing there's about 100 of those, and they're sort of grouped into different areas there of that they lend themselves to the sorts of areas that you focus on in your management systems. The detail that sits behind this is quite substantial, and it's not an exercise to be undertaken lightly. But there's a number of companies and groups that have been doing this, and it's been reasonably road tested. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, that's sort of the baseline getting through there. People have been asking, particularly around how do we actually guide the development of technology, with the designers. And what this you're seeing on screen at the moment is a pictorial. We call them the storyboards, but they're a 3D version of what was in the original PR5A document. There was 24 scenarios that were identified that were prevalent in a surface mine, and in an underground mine the same. And but the scenarios were slightly different, obviously, for an underground. But what we've tried to do is take the 2D versions and actually give some functional and performance requirements, because when you want to talk to a designer, what we found when we published PR5A back in 2015 is that although they gave you some indication of the sort of area to be looking, it actually didn't give you the detail that you would need as a designer to actually affect change. And we've got about 28 of these different scenarios, quite specific. The first group of 26 was shared with the industry, and because our attitude is, well, if you share it, people are either going to break it on you and you'll fail early, and that's good, or they'll align with you and generally enhance it. So far, with the first 26 that went out, everyone's saying, yep, we can agree on all this stuff, which is, one of the key objectives is if we can agree a common approach, then designers and others can start to use this to build product with some confidence that they're spending their money in the right direction. One of the member companies of Emers came back and said they'd had an incident in relation to an area outside of the first 26, which was to do with downhill hauling. And there's been a couple more storyboards added. These are available and through the Knowledge Hub, which we'll show you a bit later on. But this is one example. The second example, this was T-intersection, was one. Unfortunately, we had a fatality in that T-intersection type methodology. And another common one is where light vehicles are trying to access the hazardous zone of a heavy vehicle. The way we do that today is typically you get on a radio and you use POS comms and you do all these things that are very procedural and very fallible to human failure. This approach is one that's been set up that says you don't get to enter this zone until there's a safe state of the vehicle. How's that done? So you can press a button on the screen, call up the vehicle. That vehicle, the heavy vehicle, can't respond until they're in a safe state. So 0 speed, park brake on, in neutral. If that, at any point in time where that state's achieved and then the car goes to enter and it's not then held, it would automatically go into alarm for both vehicles, so that at least they understood something had changed and they need to be aware of it. When you look at the incident data and the prevalence of things, the heavy and light vehicle in this sort of interaction, this is a maintenance one. It was funny because we thought there was just heavy and light vehicle entering a zone. There's actually 7 different variations of this. We talk about functional performance requirement, being able to code this stuff. There's some subtle variations depending on the activity. And so that's the sort of depth of detail that we're working with designers on to say, if you had this, is this enough to be able to code and set up your product to give us an outcome? So this thing now date stamps and time stamps the interactions between the people. The radio traffic line could never do that. And we all know the failure modes of using POS comms. I misheard the thing. I thought the guy said to come in, all those sorts of things. So anyway, there's some work in this space, and we'll keep going on it.
So Tony, just on that, you've just gone through the storyboards and they've been released in the industry. Can you talk a little bit about the Knowledge Hub and how it can help the industry users and designers that to use this work? We've mentioned a bit about the Knowledge Hub. Could you go into some detail?
Thanks for that, Dan. Coming back to the array diagram again, we identified the Knowledge Hub aspects, some time back. The ICMM Knowledge Hub went live last year, and we've had a beta version of the vehicle interaction one since about March or April, and we've been testing that with the working group, trying to get a sense of what's going to add value and what's practical. We've launched that now just before Christmas, and it's available online to the public. And the navigation model that we've tried to use is not just some IT type directory structure. We've tried to use a journey model, which you can see the picture on the right-hand top corner there. you know, where are you on the journey? If you're right at the start, you're trying to work out what are my problems and those sorts of things. You know, obviously the maturity framework comes into play, and there's links in there to get you back to the ICMM website if you want to do that. And you progress down the journey, and depending on where you are, right to sort of this step 4 is, well, I actually decided I want to do something and I want to run a project. So things like the work breakdown structure that's below there is in that section. The storyboards and those sorts of things are in there. So I'm just going to change gears here. I'll just pop out of this presentation and get into, I can see what technology does to me. There we go. Stop sharing that one. Start sharing this one. That one. So this is the actual Immersed website coming up. It's live. If you scroll down when you enter, there's a section here, Visit Our Knowledge Hub. Click on the Knowledge Hub button. Just going to quickly rip through some of this. It talks generally about the approach, and then you can scroll down. Here's the navigation. If you hold the bar over it, gives you a bit about what each section is. I'm just going to click on section 4. Starts to give you a bit more breakdown about the detail of what's in section 4, and you can see here the work breakdown structure at the bottom. If I click on that, again, more detail. So as you keep going, it unfolds. And if you want to actually view the resource, here it is. And if you hover over it, it'll give you a deeper description. And if I click on, say, project management, scroll down, here is the improvement guide that was mentioned as an overarching thing, and 1.1.1 maturity framework. And if I click on that, it's going to keep going and take me to the ICMM website. So it's navigational. In each of the little sub boxes, there is a template that is set up. It's not meant to give you all the detail, but it's there to give you some prompts and make you think. We're not here to tell you how to do it. We're just here to guide you, to help you through your process. And this is just a collection of knowledge from all of us as time's going on. So that's a quick little navigation.
Just on that, we just noticed that within the teams that we've got the meeting chat is muted. Could someone just try and send a message through just to see if something comes up? I see John Schellenberg's name there. John, would you mind just trying to type a quick message in to make sure you can message us? Yep, perfect. Thank you. We've got tests coming through. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Just want to make sure it was working. It's very quiet on the outside end.
We have tried to adjust our presentation based on this morning's questions. So it sounds like we've maybe answered some of the things that were asked. So I'm going to go back to the slide pack. So in conclusion, the immersed approach is based on a system level understanding, engineering logic, because it's an engineering issue, and it's wide engagement and focuses on outcomes. So so if you get into this information and you've got any issues or you've got any ideas and you think it's broken or it's not right, we're really happy to hear that, and then we can change it. At this point, we took a lot of last year to go live with the Knowledge Hub, because we were hesitant, saying, have we actually reached the point where we can provide information at a reasonable level that's going to help people? And we see now that the end of 2020 and into 21 is this delivery phase of the improvement stuff. Is everything in the Knowledge Hub? No, there's still some elements, so I'll talk about that. But we think where people are at, the launch of the maturity framework approach, and there's a second phase of that going on right now through the ICMM, it's prompting people to ask questions. So we've sort of, at this point, focused on the bits that we think you need at this level, and we're going to continue to add things further along the way. And I suppose in the end, that Matt said it, and I think Ian said it a few times, this is a complex issue. And no wonder we've had so much trouble over the years trying to move forward on it. And there's a lot of money being thrown at this. And whatever gets thrown at it in the future, we'd like to see it as targeted as possible and add as much value. So, you got to manage, coordinate, and collaborate on the moving parts of this thing. And there is no silver bullet. There's a lot of holsters out there with empty guns in them, and there's coins on the floor. So anyway, hopefully we've given some insight in that respect. I just want to finish on the array diagram here. This is updated as of February. The one we had before was last year, 2020. This is now. And the good thing is, we think in terms of the things that we needed to build or deliver or influence, it's getting green. There's 4 key boxes here. That this first brown one up the top, the control framework, we're on track to hopefully deliver that at the end of the quarter or in early April. Linking with that is the self-assessment review guide, which sort of helps you start to set up that baseline approach, and also the guide for preparation and delivery of those sort of workshops. And what we see is we'll probably look to run a webinar in that space in April, specifically around setting yourself up for those sorts of things. There's a couple of other areas in here that are brown, the good practice case studies. Really, we see that they're going to be ongoing, and we're going to continually get case studies of application that really helps everyone. We've got some already, and there's some coming through. We're probably going to change that box to really about setting up a curation and development procedure so that we can actually gather those things in the right way and get them published. Down the bottom here, the other brown box is in project engagement or stakeholder engagement. You know, we've really reached that point. You know, we've got all this information, and today is really the opening session of how that engagement's starting, and it's going to be ongoing. The other brown box there is all of the sort of researchers and industry involvement pieces, and you know, that's going to be an ongoing thing as well. So we might just quickly see if there's some questions. There's a few coming in. I think Henro sent one in. So he's asking really, as we progress along the journey to level 9, the proximity tech providers have to work very closely with OEMs. Is there a framework that describes how OEMs and tech providers should collaborate? My first response is nicely. I remember the first workshop when we were doing the interface protocol, where we brought all the third-party providers in the room and all the OEMs, and I think we had 70 or 80 people in the room and 50 or 60 on the web. And everyone had their arms folded, and
the shutters were down.
And the shutters were down, and they were in their corners. And in terms of, I think what's Emers has done is provided an enabling environment for those relationships to build and grow. We don't sort of specifically have a method for getting people together. We're not a marriage broker, but what we have done is provided hopefully some mechanisms that have allowed people to come together and work in a way. And we've seen that. There's a number of third parties, and we're now working with OEMs, and the doors are not closed like they were. So
I think to add to that one, you know, we worked heavily on the protocol now that allows the third-party providers and OEMs to communicate across a common protocol. That has been sanctioned and is part of the ISO standard that has been developed by the ISO committees. Emers has worked closely with the ISO teams to get some of those things across the line. You know, we're not a sanctioning organisation, but we certainly have worked closely with the OEMs and providers to get that framework and protocol sorted out, and you can certainly look that ISO standard up.
And we've got Phil Nelthorpe on the phone today, and Phil's a member of that ISO committee, and I want to thank him for all of the effort and support that he's provided in liaison and collaboration in the space. He's certainly, it's been very welcomed. And the other person I'd like to call out is that Niels Muller is on the line, and Niels was heavily involved in the development of the maturity framework stuff, and has done a great job in that space. And with some great support from Roy Murley as well, who's on the line this afternoon. We've got another question from Peter Stegmaier here. How can the new industry participants in VI best join the relevant work groups and be able to effectively cooperate? With my other hat on, I sit on the ICSV steering committee at the ICMM level and work with the co-chairs in the VI space. So I think there is no barrier to participation in the ICSV Vehicle Interaction Working Group. And as I earlier showed, there's there's the working group that we have within the Emers area as well, that there's no barrier to involvement in that exercise. So if you just email Mark Holmes about the ICSV one, Mark will include you. And if you email Eve, which we'll put out when we send the information out, you can email Eve and she'll make sure that you're on the right working group. We've got 1 minute to go. Is there any other questions that people can quickly type?
Tony, perhaps one from the floor. Could you comment on the material that we've built in as a resource? And I think perhaps the comment might be prefaced. We think it's good enough to be useful now, but we are very much up for improvement. And it's very much adapt and apply.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said earlier, Mike, we've been hesitant. You know, we sort of held back, and so you get sit there going, "Oh, when's enough?" And it was like, well, we've got to do it. So we've put it out there, and we really value the feedback. We've got another comment from Mark Davis here that he's saying the framework's useful and well explained to help people start off in the journey and create buy-in. Certainly, those were our objectives, and I think, you know, when you get into this material, it's going to challenge some of the ways you think about things. There's parts of your organisation that are going to struggle with some of this because they might well be steeped in their approach, and this does challenge some of the ways that we've done or built or constructed some of the controls exercises. So there's quite a piece of people management. So in terms of the examples there that he's asking about good practice, you know, the case study stuff, we've already got some. You know, there was one done on the great work that Roy Murley did at the Alloys Group in South Africa. You know, we're looking to update Roy's story because he hasn't stopped. He's now gone further and further. In fact, the Mine of the Future digitisation, Roy's up in that space at the moment. And so there's quite a number of things. We just got to get that process of curation and development and, you know, finalised. We've got it built, but we've finalised that, and then actively look for input. Because it's not about just volume of stuff and just posting things like incident and things. It's not the answer. It's people want to see out of those case studies, you know, specific knowledge and key information that's relevant. And it doesn't need to be 50 pages or whatever. It can be quite succinct at times. So we're quite cognizant of that. We're all busy and we don't have time to read and interpret things. So that's one of the things. Look, I think it's time. Unless there's any other questions, we ran over a few minutes this morning, but we don't want to hold people up. We thought an hour snapshot, keep it short and do these more often. We've got some more planning to do, but probably in March, we'll be looking to run one. Ian mentioned before about loss of control. We're looking to run one on the fatigue management aspects of this. A lot of people talk about fatigue management as some separate issue. It's a key factor in the loss of control events in the vehicle interaction model, and it's a key. It sits under this space. So when you do your baseline, the links to the fatigue stuff are really important. So it's an area where you can start to address this quite early and see, and you've got plenty of examples where people have seen substantial change in their near miss and loss of control events by getting that piece of the fatigue. And there's other elements that cause loss of control that need addressing as well.
You know, technology can be used to help us better do what we do now,
yep,
without the silver bullet machine intervention last line of defence.
Yeah, you're right, Mark. I didn't say that earlier, but you know, there is two types of technology. What helps us do better what we do now, the existing controls, and that's why the steps are there in the work breakdown structure, and the stuff that replaces what we do now. And the reality is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in that. It helps us do better what we do now, but you've got to be able to integrate that and understand how you change from what you're doing now to where you're going. So I might throw back to Mark to close out, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much to the Emers team for great presentation. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions and for your participation as well. We'll probably send out a survey following this call, just to get continuing to see what sort of areas you'd like us to develop further. And yes, we'll also. We'll send out the slides as well as the recording from this webinar as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and speak to you soon.